For decades, whispers of the Queen Mother's most guarded possession, the one tiara she swore would never reappear in public haunted royal corridors. But now, in a revelation that has shattered Buckingham's silence, Prince Edward has come forward. Not only has the tiara resurfaced, but it comes with a secret decree. It belongs exclusively to Princess Catherine. What was once hidden is now a weapon, and its emergence changes everything. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The revelation didn't come through a press release, nor was it choreographed through the usual royal machinery. Instead, it arrived with the quiet thunder of truth, a private disclosure from Prince Edward during a discreet Windsor gathering that quickly escalated into a royal firestorm. The tiara in question had not been seen in public for over half a century, rumoured to have been locked away in the deepest corridors of the royal vault. Some believed it had been quietly destroyed or rendered inaccessible by legal binding due to its symbolism. But according to Edward, the Queen Mother gave explicit instructions before her passing. This tiara, representing legacy, power, and silent resilience, was to be handed to only one woman, Catherine. This wasn't just about jewels, this was about a transfer of symbolic matriarchal authority. The Queen Mother had always wielded subtle but unshakable influence, and for her to designate Catherine as the sole recipient of such a potent item suggested more than admiration. It implied succession, favour, and the handing of an invisible sceptre. Within minutes of Edward's disclosure, murmurs began swirling through royal ranks. High-ranking aides reportedly scrambled to verify the claim, while others dismissed it as Edward's private interpretation. But there was no denying the impact of the timing just 1 minute before a major internal summit that included Charles, Camilla, William, Anne, and key council members. It wasn't a leak. It was a detonation. Camilla's reaction was reportedly immediate. Those close to the matter revealed she had long harboured aspirations to possess the tiara, believing that with her elevation in royal stature, she had the rightful claim to heirlooms once reserved for the inner sanctum. Her past attempts to secure other items from the Queen Mother's personal trove, though never confirmed, now take on a more ominous undertone. The idea that such a powerful symbol was not only withheld from her, but reserved exclusively for Catherine, has now erupted into what insiders are calling a brewing war of legacy. Because this isn't just about possession, it's about perception, about public image, about the soul of the monarchy. And in choosing to reveal it now, Edward hasn't just honoured a secret promise, he's pulled back the curtain on the crown's internal fractures. Why now? Why Catherine? And what deeper motives did the Queen Mother harbour as she penned this final unspoken decree? The questions have only just begun. But if the world is only now discovering the truth behind the Queen Mother's final wish, what else has been deliberately hidden? And why has Edward waited until now? Behind closed doors at Balmoral, Prince Edward made a confession so unsettling, even the walls seemed to retreat. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't expected, and it certainly wasn't approved. But what he revealed about the Queen Mother's sealed letter, her final act of maternal defiance, has now shaken the foundation of royal succession. In the privacy of the estate's oldest drawing room, Edward spoke words that had been buried under years of restraint. The letter had remained untouched, unopened to all but him, since the final weeks before the Queen Mother passed. It had been handed to him in complete secrecy, away from palace eyes, away from protocol, wrapped in royal stationery, but written with the urgency of a woman who knew time was slipping. Inside that envelope was no polite sentiment, no ceremonial goodbye. It was a directive, a plea, a fire-laced instruction from a matriarch whose voice had once silenced prime ministers. She named Catherine, not as a suggestion, but as a mandate. She is the one, the Queen Mother had written, the chosen symbol of grace the monarchy cannot survive without. See that the crown of legacy meets her brow and not another's. The contents stunned Edward when he first read them. Not just because of their candour, but because of their implications. In naming Catherine, the Queen Mother had deliberately bypassed Camilla. She had, with the sharp stroke of a pen, reached across years of royal conditioning and tradition to cast her allegiance not with bloodline, but with character. And that placed Edward in a crucible. Honour his grandmother's dying wish, or preserve the quiet illusion of unity within a family already hanging by threads. For years he chose silence, not out of weakness but out of calculation. He feared the detonation. He feared that revealing the letter would rupture alliances, set off palace factions, and hand Camilla an open excuse to accuse him of manipulation. So he waited, and he watched, but that waiting came with a cost. Edward's silence stretched across coronations, ceremonies, and reshuffling roles. He watched as Catherine endured attacks, isolation, and whispers, all while holding herself with the exact dignity the Queen Mother had once recognized. And still he said nothing, until now, because something changed. Perhaps it was a look in Charles's eyes. Perhaps it was Camilla's recent maneuverings with royal patronage. Or perhaps T was Catherine herself, her quiet strength, her increasing resemblance to a younger Elizabeth, her grace under the weight of public scrutiny. Whatever it was, Edward knew that delaying any longer would make him complicit in a lie. The letter is real, the intent is undeniable, and the act of revealing it has not only honored a private oath, it has shattered a wall of institutional denial that many within the firm hoped would remain intact. Edward didn't ask for permission to speak. He didn't consult palace advisors. He simply stepped into history, cracked it open, and handed the world the truth. And while his voice remained measured, the aftershock of what he shared continues to reverberate in every royal chamber. But as Edward breaks his silence, someone else breaks their composure, and she isn't known for doing so. The royal family has seen outbursts. It has endured storms. But nothing quite matched the thunder in Camilla's voice when she learned the tiara wasn't hers to claim. In a moment that royal staff are now calling the shattered crystal hour, Camilla's reaction wasn't just emotional, it was volcanic. It began with a whisper, passed to her through a private aide as she prepared for a ceremonial appearance. The message was short, clinical, and devastating. The Queen Mother's tiara had been reassigned exclusively to Catherine, and the revelation had been made public by Edward himself. Within seconds, the air in her chamber changed. Aides standing by recounted the sudden, sharp sound of a crystal decanter smashing against the marble fireplace, an eruption so forceful that nearby staff froze. Camilla didn't just react, she detonated. Her fury wasn't quiet or concealed. It burst out in accusations of betrayal, targeted squarely at Edward, whose loyalty she had never truly trusted. "He's been waiting for this," she allegedly shouted, "waiting to humiliate me just like the others." But her rage didn't stop there. She turned her wrath toward Catherine, questioning her character, her intentions, and perhaps most tellingly, her right to ascend in symbolic power. For Camilla, this wasn't about the diamonds. It was about something far deeper, an erosion of the authority she believed she had secured after years of struggle, compromise, and calculated positioning. In her mind, royal precedence had been earned. By surviving public backlash, enduring comparisons, and aligning herself with Charles's reign, she thought she had finally crossed the threshold into untouchable status. But the Queen Mother's letter, revealed with surgical precision by Edward, ripped that illusion apart. It was not only a rejection of Camilla's position, it was a declaration that her authority was never recognized by the one woman whose legacy still casts a long shadow over the monarchy. Charles arrived within minutes of the outburst. An emergency meeting was called behind the drawing room doors. What happened next remains shrouded in silence, but what leaked afterward was more revealing than any official statement. Charles, usually quick to stabilize Camilla's fury, remained muted. He didn't rush to her defense. He didn't issue a counter-statement. Instead, witnesses say he appeared fatigued, distracted, as though something in Edward's revelation had stirred doubts he could no longer suppress. That silence, far more than Camilla's shouting, echoed through the palace halls. Because in a family where words are measured like currency, silence often means something is shifting, something irreversible. Camilla's fury wasn't just a momentary lapse. It marked a rupture, an open wound that could no longer be concealed behind protocol or palace smiles. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't just fighting Catherine. She was fighting the ghost of the Queen Mother, whose Fina, El Whisper, now carried the power of a royal command. And as she stood amidst shattered glass and unspoken resentment, it became clear her grip on legacy was loosening, and there was no protocol to reclaim it. While Camilla fumes and Catherine remained silent, One woman breaks rank and rewrites the rules of royal allegiance forever. It was never Anne's place to intervene, or so the traditionalists thought. But when she stood before the Royal Council, defied precedent, and endorsed the Queen Mother's secret wish, it wasn't just a validation of Catherine. It was a rejection of everything Camilla stood for. For years, Anne had been the embodiment of royal discipline. Silent, stoic, unwavering in her adherence to the institution, she had built a reputation on loyalty to structure, not personalities. She had watched the tides of public opinion crash against the monarchy. She had endured scandals, schemes, and shifting loyalties, and through it all, she had remained firm, a pillar of restraint. But when word of the Queen Mother's sealed letter spread, and the council began to quietly murmur about its implications, Anne made a decision that stunned even those closest to her. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't consult protocol. She stood, unannounced, during the Clarion Council's private session and delivered what insiders now call the most politically charged statement of her royal life. Her voice was calm, but the meaning was thunderous. My mother, she began, watched Catherine from afar with the same eyes she once watched Elizabeth. Quiet strength, unshakable grace. It wasn't power she saw, it was purpose. The room reportedly froze. The Princess Royal had never invoked her mother's private views before, let alone in a matter as controversial as heirloom succession. But Anne went further. She called the Queen Mother's decision not only deliberate but wise, and stated, "For the record, that Catherine was the rightful inheritor of the legacy that binds our family to the people. No royal decree, no formality, just raw truth spoken by the one royal whose silence had always spoken louder than words." Royal advisors were caught completely off guard. Some whispered that Anne had overstepped. Others remained stunned by the sheer gravity of what had just occurred. Because Anne didn't speak in her role as a constitutional figurehead, she spoke as a daughter, a sister, a woman who had witnessed the private weight of monarchy from inside its coldest rooms. And that made her words heavier than any proclamation could have been. In that moment, the internal power dynamic shifted. Camilla's allies, once confident in their grasp over ceremonial precedents, began to fall back. Legacy circles, long driven by quiet loyalty to the Queen Mother's memory, realigned. And in the middle of it all, Catherine stood still, composed, silent. But those close to her later confirmed tears welled in her eyes, not from triumph, but from the unspoken knowledge that someone had finally said it aloud. Anne's intervention did more than endorse a transfer of jewels. It tore open the veil of neutrality the palace had so carefully sewn. Her words, grounded in personal memory and moral clarity, forced a reckoning within the monarchy. Because when the Princess Royal speaks not out of obligation, but out of principle, it sends a signal. That loyalty to truth must come before loyalty to titles, and in choosing to stand beside Catherine, Anne isolated Camilla without ever mentioning her name. But as internal loyalties realign, a deeper mystery surrounding the Queen Mother's motivations begins to surface, and what's found in her diary sends shockwaves across the monarchy. She wrote it in faded ink. She never meant for the world to read it, but deep within her final diary, locked away, the royal archives lay a page so intimate, so painfully prophetic, that it's now being called the Queen Mother's final royal act. An emotional plea to protect Catherine at all costs. The diary had been known to exist, but its contents were always presumed to be benign, a record of daily reflections, royal routines, perhaps private grief. But Edward, in the wake of revealing the letter, made an even more chilling disclosure. Hidden in the final pages, written just months before her passing, was a passage that struck with poetic clarity and brutal foresight. She wrote of the coming shift, the approaching uncertainty that would follow Elizabeth's reign, not in dates or events, but in tone. She sensed it, a loosening grip, a quiet decay within the house she had spent a lifetime preserving. And then, in that fragile script, she named her fear, a monarchy manipulated by those whose ambitions outweigh their love for the people. There was no name, no accusation. But no one reading the entry could ignore the implication. An unfit crown wearer, she wrote, will someday rise not from blood, but from blind entitlement. And in contrast, she elevated Catherine, not by rank or marriage, but by spirit. The silent phoenix, she called her, the one who restores without demanding, who lifts without speaking. The Queen Mother had seen something long before anyone else had dared to, a calm force rising not from power but from principle, and she believed that only by safeguarding this force could the monarchy survive the fractures she saw forming behind its polished veneer. The passage ended with a haunting final wish: "Let what I cherished most pass to the one who never asked for it but deserves all of it." Edward's voice reportedly faltered as he read those lines aloud to a small group of senior royals. The room, according to insiders, fell into silence. Not out of disbelief, but out of recognition. Because in those words, the Queen Mother had not only anointed a successor in spirit, she had condemned the path the crown had slowly begun to follow. Public reaction was instant. Though the full diary remains sealed, leaks of this passage ignited a national firestorm. Public figures and citizens alike began calling for its full release. Was this just one page among many? How long had others known? And why had the Queen Mother's voice, perhaps the only one untainted by politics in the royal lineage, been suppressed for so long? Support for Catherine surged, not for her titles, not for her position, but for her silence, for the grace that, once seen as passivity, was now being recognized as restraint in its highest form. What the monarchy does with this revelation remains uncertain. But one truth is now inescapable. The Queen Mother saw the storm before anyone else, and she did what she could with the time she had left. She wrote it down, hid it away, and prayed that someone would find the strength to read it aloud. That moment has come, and with it, the weight of legacy has shifted once again. While the past whispers truth, the present faces an eruption, and it comes from the last royal many expected to speak. When Prince William's private message to Edward was leaked, it wasn't just the words that shook the palace, it was the confession behind them, a message that both thanked Edward and warned him. And within that tension, a brotherly rift begins to widen. The note wasn't long. It was composed late into the night, just hours after Edward's disclosure of the Queen Mother's letter. William had chosen to send it through a secure channel, an encrypted message routed through a trusted aide. At least that's what he believed. In it, William expressed gratitude in deliberate, measured words. He thanked Edward for honoring their grandmother's wish. He acknowledged the emotional weight behind such a decision. But tucked within that appreciation was a single chilling sentence that now haunts the palace. "You've opened a door we may never be able to close again." It was more than a warning. It was an admission that William, too, knew this revelation would be the beginning of something uncontrollable, something neither the monarchy nor the public could forget or unhear. The message was never meant to surface, and yet, within 24 hours, it was leaked to select media outlets. Not the entire letter, just enough to cause rupture, enough to expose William's inner conflict. The palace scrambled. Rumors swirled of internal sabotage. Whispers began to circulate about a palace aide who had grown disillusioned by the secrecy and chose to act. Whatever the source, the leak pulled back the curtain on a growing divide. William, so often the pillar of balance, was revealed as conflicted, caught between honoring Catherine and protecting the fragile unity of his lineage. His loyalty to his wife, his grandmother's memory, and the monarchy itself had collided, and now the entire world could see the strain. Internally, the message sent shockwaves. Charles, upon learning of the content, reportedly withdrew from engagements for the day. Some said he was quiet, others said he was shaken. But what remained clear was this: he viewed the message as a breach, a sign that William's trust in the inner circle was wavering. Their next meeting was noticeably cold, with Charles refraining from addressing the subject directly. The air between father and son shifted, dense with unsaid words, and William, while outwardly composed, carried the unmistakable burden of a man forced to choose between truth and stability, between honoring the past and protecting the present. As the media dissected the leak, the palace entered a new kind of crease. The moment didn't need press briefings. It didn't require palace statements or televised justifications. All it took was Catherine stepping into that ballroom, regal yet restrained, with the Queen Mother's most sacred tiara anchored above her brow. In a single move, the weight of weeks of chaos, secrecy, and betrayal was transformed into calm certainty. This wasn't a power play. It was a reckoning. A reckoning born not of confrontation, but of quiet certainty. She didn't have to look at Camilla. She didn't have to glance at Charles. She didn't even need to acknowledge the media storm she was walking into. Her message was unspoken but deafening. The Queen Mother's final wish lives here, and I will carry it. Those in attendance didn't breathe for several seconds. Royal insiders later described a stillness that swept across the room. Glances were exchanged, mouths tightened. Even the most seasoned royal observers could barely process what they were witnessing. Camilla, seated only feet away, reportedly went pale. Within 30 minutes, she quietly excused herself. But the damage had already been done. The symbolism was irreversible. The heirloom that had once defined the Queen Mother's reign was now resting where her words had always intended. And it wasn't just a royal moment, it was history shifting, without noise or fanfare. The press erupted within hours. Headlines across the globe captured the moment with language that hadn't been used in decades. Monarchy's silent answer: Catherine claims the crown of spirit, the tiara that ended the debate. Social media exploded. Images of Catherine were shared millions of times. Hashtags like #SilentQueen and #TrueHeirloom trended across platforms. But it wasn't just the tiara that captured the imagination of the public. It was the restraint, the timing, the dignity. Catherine had been pushed, tested, and scrutinized, and instead of retaliating, she rose, not through words, but through legacy. And in doing so, she redefined what royal strength truly looks like in the modern age. See, comparisons to Queen Elizabeth in her formative years began surfacing immediately. The poise, the silence, the unshakable moral compass that doesn't need validation. Royal commentators noted how Catherine's gesture echoed Elizabeth's earliest days of duty, when the crown was not just an institution, but a personal burden carried with reverence, not pride. For many, this moment confirmed what had been building quietly behind the noise. Catherine had become more than a royal. She had become a standard, the bar by which future conduct, grace, and legacy would now be measured. First. To national observers, including former Commonwealth leaders and historians, weighed in with rare consensus. This was not just a turning point. It was a coronation in spirit, an anointing by memory and intention rather than decree. The Queen Mother, though gone, had spoken through every thread of that tiara, and Catherine had answered without uttering a single word. Just when it seems the storm has passed, Edward drops one last piece of the puzzle, and it may be the most explosive yet. St. When the royal family thought they'd weathered the storm, Edward unveiled the final card, and it came from a forgotten drawer in the Queen Mother's chambers. A codicil, legally binding, unpublished, and within it, a clause that changes not just who wears the tiara, but who speaks for the crown first. The aftermath of the gala, as the palace SC rambled to regain control of the narrative, Edward returned to a private archive that few even remembered existed. Inside, buried beneath layers of her handwritten correspondence, he discovered a sealed envelope marked with his own initials in the Queen Mother's hand. It wasn't just a letter. It was a codicil, a formal, legally recognized amendment to her will, written in her final days. It had been withheld for one reason: it required Edward's signature to be activated. For over 2 decades he had ignored it, not out of negligence, but because he feared its power. But now, in the wake of what the monarchy had become and what Catherine had endured, he signed it without hesitation. The contents were staggering. The Queen Mother had not only designated Catherine as the exclusive inheritor of the tiara, but she had gone further, much further. The codicil formally named Catherine as her personal representative on matters of royal heritage, ceremonial interpretation, and moral custodianship. In short, Catherine was being handed symbolic authority over how the legacy of the monarchy is preserved, protected, and presented to the public. She was not merely being trusted with jewels, she was being entrusted with meaning, with history, with narrative. The implications were immediate. Legal teams moved swiftly to verify its authenticity. Senior royal advisors reviewed its phrasing line by line, only to arrive at one undeniable conclusion: it was valid, completely within the Queen Mother's rights, and now fully enforceable. This was no longer a matter of personal preference or tradition. It was a matter of law, and it dropped squarely into the lap of King Charles, who now found himself in an unprecedented constitutional bind. To ignore the codicil would be to reject his mother's final legal act. To accept it would mean empowering Catherine with a new form of symbolic influence. One that could redefine royal precedents, tradition, and narrative authority from the inside out. Behind the walls of the palace, the mood turned electric. Advisors were split. Camilla, sources say, was livid, fearing that every public moment, every symbol, every heirloom now passed through a lens Catherine alone could shape. Meanwhile, the public rallied. This wasn't seen as a power grab. It was seen as justice catching up with truth. For years, Catherine had played the long game, enduring, observing, rising. Now, with one signature, she had been elevated by the only figure whose legacy still commanded universal respect, the Queen Mother, and the codicil may be just the beginning. Legal experts warn that this clause could set a precedent for broader reforms, an invitation to revisit the structure of ceremonial control within the monarchy. The very definition of royal moral authority is shifting, no longer housed in titles, but in the quiet dignity of those who earn it. But while the codicil legitimizes the past, it also sets the stage for a future few are prepared for, and the final twist is still to come. Many believe the matter is settled, but inside the palace, murmurs suggest otherwise. Camilla is regrouping, Charles is wavering, and whispers of a retaliatory charter, a last-ditch effort to reclaim symbolic power, are gaining momentum. The tiara may have found its place, but the war for the monarchy's soul has just begun behind closed doors, far from the cameras and carefully crafted statements. Camilla is not retreating. According to insiders, she has begun consulting with a tight circle of senior aides, some of whom have long histories within the institution and know precisely how to wield tradition as a weapon. Their goal? A counter-charter, a document designed not to challenge the Queen Mother's codicil directly, but to reframe its interpretation, to cast it as symboli. See sentiment rather than binding legacy. In essence, a move to dilute its influence, to tether Catherine's newfound moral authority to ceremonial limits. It's not an open rebellion. It's something more dangerous, a quiet reassertion of control dressed in protocol. Charles, meanwhile, remains trapped in the center of a storm he thought had passed. The codicil caught him off guard, not only because of its content, but because of its timing. Every moment he delays addressing it publicly, pressure mounts. Advisors from opposing camps are pulling him in different directions, some urging reconciliation through silence, others demanding a firm response to re-establish traditional hierarchy. But the longer he waits, the louder the silence becomes. Each day of inaction is being interpreted not as contemplation, but capitulation. His role as monarch, meant to unify, is now shadowed by indecision. And the cost is beginning to show in how the public views his leadership, not firm, not fatherly, but fragile. William finds himself walking a tightrope no one envies. He has tried to balance allegiance to his father with loyalty to his wife. He has tried to shield his children from the widening rift. But behind the scenes, factions are forming. Staff members are choosing sides. Allies are whispering loyalties. And even he, the future king, is being watched for signs of weakness. The strain is undeniable. He knows that any misstep could either further fracture the institution or define his legacy. And perhaps most painfully, he understands that no matter how hard he tries, someone will feel betrayed. What was once a question of heirloom ownership has now exploded into something far more dangerous. The Queen Mother's legacy has become a battlefield. Her voice, preserved in ink and law, has reignited buried tensions, forcing the royal family to confront not only its past, but its future. And, as public sentiment continues to surge behind Catherine, many are now calling for something unthinkable just months ago: the formal creation of a new ceremonial role, moral regent. A title that would exist not in governance, but in guidance, not in control, but in conscience. The very idea has divided Parliament watchers and royalists alike. And now, the question that lingers like fog across the lawns of Windsor is no longer about jewels, or titles, or even tradition. It is this: can legacy wield more power than the throne itself? Or does it, once unleashed, become something even more dangerous? Something uncontrollable? This story is still unfolding. Subscribe now so you never miss the next revelation from inside Britain's most secretive corridors of power. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.